I never thought I would share this story with anyone. No one besides my therapist knows. Not my parents, not my friends, no one. It began when I was about 10 years old. I was bullied a lot in school. People would often tell me they wished I was gone and that no one would ever be able to love me. I spent a lot of time at home, pretending to be sick. I'd sit around watching cartoons all day. One day, I was flicking through the channels when a man appeared on the screen and completely took me by surprise. He was an older man, an actor, and a comedian. I instantly felt a connection with him. I began to obsess over him. I watched everything he ever started. I bought everything. I researched him extensively online and watched interviews with him. Seeing how nice he was with his fans made me instantly think that he was the only nice person in the entire world. Of course, my parents started to notice all the pictures I had of him, but they didn't think anything of it because after all, I was a preteen and probably just obsessed with my favorite celebrity, right? At 14, I finally switched schools, but it was too late. The words of my old classmates had wounded me, and I began to spiral into a deep state of dark thoughts. My mood would often switch, and I would suffer from so much self-hatred that I started to ruin myself in secret. By then, I had switched my attention to a new celebrity. He was a young, aspiring actor with the most amazing smile and the kindest way to treat everyone around him. He was everything to me, and my obsession for my new crush was worryingly more intense. Sometimes I would prefer to not go out with my new school friends, just so I could go home and be on forums dedicated to him, or watch the same films he was in over and over again. Even though I had recently, for the first time in my life, gotten any real friends, I still felt lonelier than I ever had. My self-hatred was getting worse. It was like a drug that released endorphins and instantly made me forget how sad and lonely I was. Between the years of 15 to 18, I remember very little of what happened in school and the real world. I only remember starting to spur up conversations with my favorite celebrity, thinking he was there with me in the room. He became an escape mechanism for my loneliness, a way to keep my head above water and help me survive. I began daydreaming of becoming his girlfriend, and that thought instantly became an obsessive thing. I started to believe I could actually achieve this, and if I tried hard enough, I would eventually meet him in real life, and he would obviously instantly fall in love with me because we were meant to be. Then one night, I saw my favorite forum blow up. My celebrity had gotten a girlfriend. It was all over the tabloids. My heart broke into a million pieces. Suddenly, all the nasty comments from the bullies came rushing back to me, and I believed it. It would actually be for the best if I was gone. I took the tablets, but my emotional state made me cry so loudly that my mom woke up and heard me. I was rushed to the emergency room and had my stomach pumped and forced to drink coal. After my attempt, I was admitted to the ward, and for the first time in my life, I was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and depression. I am so lucky that I was able to receive the most intensive care. I was able to join therapy groups along with individual sessions that were specifically aimed towards helping people with my diagnosis. But I didn't get better because I chose to keep a major secret from everyone. For many years to come, I still wouldn't tell any of my doctors, therapists, or psychologists about my celebrity obsession. My feeling of emptiness was still ever present into my 20s. By mid-20s, I had started to cope better with some of the issues my diagnosis brought me, but I was still obsessed over my celebrity. He had become single again, and I began dreaming about us being together again. But this time, I was sure it was going to happen. So I started researching online. I started wearing the type of clothes I thought he would like, talk in the way his ex-girlfriend did, buy the perfumes I thought he would like, and try my best to become someone I thought he would love. I also chose my education based on what interests he had. Everything I did so I could mimic the person I thought he would fall in love with. On some days, I would feel happy and ecstatic about the thought of him and convinced that one day we would be together. On other days, I was convinced it would never happen, and the sight of him in pictures would remind me how disconnected we were and make me absolutely devastated. Those days were the hardest because they would often last weeks, and that's when dark thoughts would appear. I started searching frantically online to know where he was at any given moment, if anyone had seen sightings of him, and where he lived. I found enough information and began frequently traveling to where he lived. I would lie to my friends, my family, and therapists every time I would go, because deep down, I knew it was wrong. I started going to the places I knew he would be at, stalking the areas, spending up to 6 hours at cafes or parks, just hoping that someday he would come by and that I would get to meet him. I fantasized about our first encounter, where I would pretend I didn't know who he was, and he would instantly fall for me. I spent so much money on many failed trips, until one day, at a cafe, I finally met him. I was startled, nervous. I began shaking all over, but I stuck to my plan. I pretended I didn't know him and fell into a conversation with him. He was as sweet as I could have ever imagined, and it fueled my thoughts of us being together. I kept thinking to myself, this is okay. He doesn't need to know. I'm not a bad kind of stalker, because I love him, and I would never do anything to hurt him. But of course, nothing came out of it. I was just another random woman he had chatted with, and then he left the cafe and went on about his day. The devastation was immense. My mind was constantly torn between being 100% certain that if I just kept trying to meet him and see him one more time, I would eventually be with him. Because of him, I stopped dating. I stopped any contact with men because I couldn't find anyone attractive. He was the only one I loved, and he was the only one I could ever be with. I decided to give it another try, and for 2 whole years, I decided to study in the city he was living in. I would get horrible grades and never attend class because I'd be spending most of my days stalking the areas he was last seen. Only when I read online that he was abroad filming and I knew he wouldn't be around, I would go to class. In all 2 years, I would meet him on scarce occasions and have a chat with him. Nothing wrong with that, I told myself. I had, after all, moved to the exact area he lived in. So now I was just another citizen in his area. My life was completely consumed by him and spiraling out of control. I put myself in an immense amount of debt to be able to pay for the high costs of that area. One day, walking home from a cafe, I passed a newsstand and saw his face on the cover of nearly every tabloid magazine. There was also a pretty woman on the covers, holding his hands in some pictures, dining intimately together in others. It was his new girlfriend. Devastated all over again, I was so deeply convinced that if I couldn't be with him, then I wasn't worth anything. If he, someone of high status, wasn't my boyfriend, then I wasn't special. And that's when something registered, and I realized for the first time that I was still haunted by the people back in school. I suddenly knew that the reason I wanted to be with him because that would make me special. And that way, the people who bullied me would come to see how wonderful I really was. I decided I needed to go back home, and I needed to get proper help. For so many years, I had lied to my therapists and psychologists, pretending I didn't know the reason for what made me sad, when in reality, not being with him did. For well over a decade, I didn't tell anyone about this, because I was ashamed of it. I thought people would laugh and make fun of me, Maybe say, how can a woman well into her 20s have such a teenage celebrity crush on someone? It would be laughable. Luckily, my therapist didn't laugh. She immediately noticed that I had been using him to escape from the harshness of reality, and it had started out as a great coping mechanism, but eventually turned into a living nightmare. It took me years before I was able to open up and tell her about the fact that I had, indeed, been stalking him for a quite massive amount of time. I was scared to tell her. I was afraid she would call the police on me, because everything I had seen about stalkers was bad. They were extremely dangerous and bad people who assaulted the privacy of innocent people. And I believed that, of course, I must have been a criminal and a bad person to have done that, even though I never followed him or did anything illegal. But the fact that I had been hanging around where he would often be seen and pretended that I didn't know him to get closer to him was enough for me to think she would call the police. Eventually, through many months of sessions, she told me I was suffering from something called celebrity worship syndrome. Celebrity worship syndrome is an obsessive addictive disorder in which a person becomes overly involved with the details of a celebrity's personal and professional life. But unfortunately, not much is known about it or how to treat it. I think we often dismiss people who might be suffering from this to just having what is typically considered a celeb crush. To this day, well into my 30s, I've been able to manage it to some degree with help from my therapist. I am no longer stalking him, but I have still been unable to find a boyfriend because no one can ever match his standards. I'm taking steps to detach from him completely, and I'm hoping that one day, all this will be behind me.